Edward Norton, welcome to Q.
Thanks.
Nice to see you. Before we get going, I wanted to know if you could read something for me.
Depends on what it is.
All right, sure. Have a look.
A little bit of Shakespeare. Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant.
So that's the thing that opens up your new movie, Motherless Brooklyn. What's the significance of that quote?
Well, not to be too Bob Dylan about it, but I think people are going to pull from these things what they read into the moment that we're living in. I think there are a lot of things that I thought were worth thinking about in terms of the narratives that we as societies put out about ourselves in terms of how we run ourselves. The democratic narrative, the humanistic narrative, versus where power is actually held, and how who holds it and how they wield it. And I think that in this moment especially, it's become worth re-examining those questions.
It is not unlike a Bob Dylan quote, isn't it? Because I remember reading it off the top, and I remember thinking that, okay, well, perhaps the quest for power itself is not inherently evil, but to have it and then not to give something benevolent to the people you have power over is the problem.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like Superman's dad says to him, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah,
and I think that Joseph Campbell said we tell the same stories over and over again. We reskin them for the times that we're living in, and I think we've seen this. It's not like humanity hasn't seen the dance of in which, for whatever reasons, in times of where people feel marginalized or people feel like resentful, whatever forces are driving fear and anxiety, the allure of the autocrat, the allure of kind of the all power, the I am the one who will get this done.
I am the only one.
Yeah,
I am the one who can fix this.
And the allure, the allure of brutal power, the allure of assertive power, naked power that's not afraid to claim for itself the kind of the right to dispense with the inconvenience of collective will and decision making.
That makes sense to me, because the Moses Randolph, like the kind of all powerful guy even though he's not the mayor in your movie, is a powerful man, but he's not a tyrant that everybody hates. I mean, there are those who love him in this, And this whole thing is interesting to me because, like, you wrote, you directed, you produced, and you starred in this film. Well, you adapted it. Mm-hmm. And something like 20 years. So there has to be something in this story, whether it be about power, whether it be about benevolence, that's stuck with you.
To be clear, the book, the main inspiration of the book is this great character, Lionel, who's a detective with Tourette's syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder. But the book takes place in the late 90s.
Yeah, why did you move it to the 50s?
Well, the book is primarily this great character study. It's this wonderful experience of being inside the mind of this very unique guy and knowing him intimately, and kind of knowing that he's smart and sensitive, funny, but then watching his afflictions kind of screw him up. He has to navigate around these kind of hilarious and painful afflictions. But the book's not about these larger themes that we're talking about. It's kind of an esoteric little plot that even the author of the book said to me, like, the plot was an excuse for the character, and everybody remembers the character. And I think that these bigger ideas, the draw to me was always just that he's this fantastic underdog. He's a person that nobody's looking at, whose affliction is also kind of his superpower, and he he, as a character, he makes you feel empathetic. You feel in the book almost from the get-go that you're on his side and you want to see him kind of outfox everybody. And that's just a great hook. Like, it's like every song needs a great hook. Like that, to me, the truth is, like, if you look back at movies like Forrest Gump, let's say, Forrest Gump is a much more political movie than you remember it being. It's very sardonic and edgy about America, the way it kind of ate itself across the 60s and 70s, and
through the lens of this innocent.
Through the lens of an innocent, right?
Yeah.
And through your empathy with the way the world treats that innocent, you hold on to a sense of purity in a way, as these tumultuous things go on in the culture and stuff like that. And it's kind of this reminder. It's the great thing about Forrest Gump and many such movies, Rain Man, things like that. Sometimes through an underdog, you're reminded to be empathetic. I mean, you're reminded that when the forces of history are difficult, that empathy for each other is kind of what holds things together.
It's
right?
the same reason that growing up is sad. The same reason that watching a
Yeah.
child grow up is sad, because you're like, oh, the world's going to happen to you at one point or another.
Yes,
And
yes.
this wide-eyed Sesame Street thing is not.
But
gonna
how do
last.
you hold on to
Yeah.
the way you felt about your friends at that time, or the way you
cared about people?
Yeah, that you cared about people. And there's a dimension that's the core of my film too. I think Lionel, because if you ask people to sit for the Byzantine plot of how racism was baked into like the fabric of New York's infrastructure by a autocrat, that's all great, but that's a little heady, you know what I mean? And I think that the thing I always felt was that those were things I was interested in looking at. But Lionel he's this great vehicle for looking at how do we treat each other, really.
The reason I found all this really interesting is that this film's about love, and it's about intrigue, and it's about an innocent, and it's about corruption. Also, weirdly, about city planning, which is a plot point I don't see in a lot of films. And in doing research, coming to this interview, I found out that your grandfather was one of the great city planners of our time. Is that right?
That's true. He was kind of the anti-Robert Moses, or in the film we called him Moses Randolph, but
James
Rouse.
James
was my
Rouse.
dad.
And were you thinking about him while you were making this film?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, he really believed that cities and the way we thought about them, about developing them, needed to be an expression of caring for people. He used to say very progressive things for an urban planner, like, cities are gardens for growing better people. And he really believed, he was a big early promoter of the idea of nurturing the vitality of inner cities, and the diversity of them and all of it. And
Okay.
and interestingly, just so you know, he
please.
had a really close relationship with Toronto, because he was from Baltimore and he came up to Algonquin fishing in the mid-50s. And the reason I spent a lot of my life up near North Bay was he fell in love with Algonquin in like 1955 and started driving up here from Baltimore like 15 hours, on the back roads to go to fishing camps like west of the park and stuff like that.
But that's beautiful that you're thinking about your grandfather in this film, because I have to say, maybe the way my brain works, I'm just thinking a lot about how I interpreted that Shakespeare quote. Maybe the way my brain works is sort of like the folklore academic-y side of me, is that I was watching your film looking for analogs for real life,
Right.
which is good and bad, right? But I think I did see a couple of things. Like I sort of saw a Jane Jacobs analog character. I saw like a Dizzy Gillespie with the bent horn sort of analog character. Am I onto something here?
Yeah, a little bit. They're all amalgams. Jane Jacobs was obviously one of the famous people who took on kind of New York's great autocrat, Robert Moses. Mm-hmm. But she was actually in the 60s. There's a woman named Hortense Gable in the 50s who actually ran a committee against racial discrimination on housing and hired many of the first African American women to graduate law school. So she's less well known, but Jane later, also tilted against the same giants.
Yeah, here in Toronto too.
Yeah. And I think in the jazz man who we just called the trumpeter, Miles Davis was very famous and had been to France, and
I thought about Miles too. Yeah.
and had come back and had a French girlfriend with a bang cut named Juliette Greco, and and was there are the one thing that happened when you meet the trumpet player, when kind of this white bohemian kid comes up and says, "I'm a trumpet player too." That was from a story Quincy Jones told me about hanging out with Miles Davis between sets when he was like working on the Birth of the Cool stuff in little clubs uptown and stuff like that. So
he might as well be Mickey Mouse to me, man. Miles Davis may as well be Charlie. You know, like these people don't really exist.
Hard,
to me,
I know,
you know?
hard to
Yeah.
believe these things happened, but they did. Yeah, I think, you know, I've always felt that sometimes people will mash up sort of a fantasy with real history. I'm always a little bit leery about, you know, throwing a fictional character into interplay with real people, you know, and saying this was a true story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that whether it's, you know, some people say Citizen Kane was about William Randolph Hearst, but if you really dig into that, they pulled in a lot of reference points in that film. That film pulled on many things that went on in their era, and of course Hearst, you know, he felt he was the target of it, but the truth is it was a literary adaptation of things about American life. And you know, the great book All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren is supposed to be about Huey Long, but he doesn't call him Huey Long, he calls him Willie Stark. And it gives you this freedom to go to more essential truths and not get hung up in, did this actually happen? Did that actually happen? And so that's what I did here.
But what if we're not talking about history here?
Right.
Like when I was watching Moses Randolph in the film, right, based on Robert Moses.
Alec Baldwin.
Alec Baldwin plays him.
Yeah.
There's a couple of lines here. There's the "I moved on her" line. There's
That wasn't Robert Moses.
Yeah. There's the a little bit of only I may be able to do this. I think it goes without saying, these are things that I've heard spoken by the current president of the United States, Donald Trump. Am I onto something there?
Yeah, I mean, and many other there are.
But those are the quotes. I mean,
Yeah, there are Easter eggs. Not even Easter eggs. Not meant to be tricky. I think that there's a lot going on right now. There's other things that he says that, you know, if you read some of the details of this wave of stories unfolding about, you know, what I would call this great comeuppance that's happening with what's getting called the Me Too moment. But I think, you know, women stepping up and saying, hey, here's the details of the way that this extension of power and its brutality, men in power thinking that these are their rights, that their right to treat me this way manifested itself this way. There are so many of the details coming out of all of that are just blood curdling. I felt like the psychology of what is it that makes a person think, what is actually going on in the head of a person like that, because it's not just about sex, it's something else. And I think that, you know, Alec, you know, when Alec's in this gear, he's really, a lot of us who came up watching, you know, Glengarry Glen Ross, and like Alec's a really great dramatic actor. He's also a theatrical actor, and I felt, you know, I feel that the way he uncorks that kind of monologue in the end, to me, he really, more even than just the words I wrote, he captures, I think, the sickness that's at the heart of the way power leads people to believe that not just that the rules have fallen away from them, but that these are the privileges, these are the rightful privileges of people who are getting things done in the world, you know?
My dad was a union organizer, and I often think that that's the reason that I think about the world in terms of power, and I think about the terms in terms of equality. I just have I think about things politically. What is it for you? Like, this is not a new thing for you. This is something that you've been thinking about for a very long time. Can you pinpoint, is there anything in your childhood that might have happened that, because a lot of people grow up apolitical, like what happened in your childhood, or who did you grow up with that led you to think this way?
My grandfather had a huge influence on me. I actually, first job I had at college, I worked for him doing affordable housing development in New York. It was when I became fascinated with a lot of what this film's about. And he was a great humanist, truly, President Clinton gave him the Medal of Freedom, our highest civilian award, because of his work to promote mechanisms for getting market capital into affordable housing development and things like that. He was an orphan as a child. He rose out of nothing to become a really, really great thinker about how you made society more equitable, just. He really was a kind of a, I didn't even want to say a saint. He wasn't a saint, but he was a lover of humanity. He really loved humanity, and he believed that the mission, the best opportunity in life was the chance to serve the greater good. And he a very inspiring figure to many, but me included. And I think that my father fought for his whole career, fought for environmental conservation and sustainability. My mother was an educator, so I grew up among people who were, as Lionel says in the film, at that one point he says, we came out of in the Depression. We were as a country, we were focused on taking care of each other. After the war, it became much more about power, and I think the way national narratives shift around the idea of who are we and what are we actually doing, how are we treating, as Alec Baldwin says, the people who are he says those people are invisible, they don't exist. What are we actually doing in terms of, what's our priority? Are we caring for each other, or are we, as another friend of mine says, are we financially maximizing? Is our view of the world the maximization, or is it caring for each other?
But also in caring for each other in the way you portray Lionel in this film. Lionel has Tourette syndrome, which is not. I was maybe a little nervous going in. What does it say about me? But it's not played for laughs. It's not a joke.
Hopefully, there's a few laughs. I mean,
but you know what I mean. Yeah. We're not laughing at Tourette syndrome.
No empathy. To me, the brilliant trick of Jonathan Letham's book is that from page one, you're on his side.
Yeah.
And I felt if we can pull that off in the film, if by hearing his inner voice, but also seeing, oh God, like what is this going to be like? But
there were those sad moments when he's trying to go to bed.
Yeah.
And he can't turn off the tics.
Yeah. But you know what's funny is I met I had met people with what I would call with milder variations of Tourette's. Tourette's is a very individualistically expressed condition. Nobody's is the same. Yeah. Some people have minor physical twitches that you've probably met someone that you think just blinks their eyes a lot, and that could be very mild Tourette's, or seems like they're cracking their neck, and that's just their twitch. Some people don't have the vocal component of the condition at all, and some people who do, it's simple. It's a word they literally almost like slip in without you noticing. Which I knew someone who said "if" all the time, and that's why I flipped that in there. But in Toronto, when we were making Death to Smoochie with Danny DeVito and Robin Williams, Robin was friends with this guy named Shane, who's a sculptor, and he has very, very severe Tourette's. It was the first time I met someone whose physical Tourette's was at first so extreme that it was distracting. It was very difficult to like. And what I found fascinating about it was, number one, Shane. The reason he and Rob, he was really funny, like a really, really funny guy, very able to laugh at the funny things that it did to him. And what was really interesting to me was the way that after a little while, you stopped paying attention to it, and you sort of could interact with him through it. It became this thing that, like lots of us, your brain's able to sort of filter a thing, right?
Right.
And I thought that was really telling and interesting, because there's, in Lionel's world, he moves through the world where if he has to navigate people who don't know him, he's constantly apologizing, having to explain, etc. But when he's in the bubble of the people who know him, they hardly react to it anymore. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And have you heard from folks from who have Tourette's about the film? Has anyone seen it?
Yes. Well, the National Association in the States for People with Tourette's, we invited them to see it early. There's been a number of moments that really delighted me when the author of the book, Jonathan Lethem, saw it and was, tearful. He was so happy about it. That was a very, very happy moment for me. When Wynton Marsalis, who did a lot of our music in the film, saw it. And there's certain things where you go, okay, like that's a great little happy box. But when we got this like message from the Tourette's Association that the people had not loved the way it portrayed, Lionel as someone able to function and rise and become a hero, be heroic, and utilize the gifts that are within it to triumph. They really loved it. But my favorite detail was that they said that during that screening, Lionel's tics were setting off the tics of all the people in the audience, and I was like, I'd give anything for a video, one of those green extra, infrared videos.
I read the same thing online. Listen, I know we're out of time. I just have one more question. I want to ask a little bit about an older role, just for a second.
Sure.
Is that I remember when I first watched American History X, I thought that I was getting a window into a subculture that I would never see, that was underneath the surface of neo-Nazis, and that I was seeing in black and white this sort of world that exists, that I would ever see it. It's in small, tiny conference rooms.
A
marginalized group. As someone who portrayed that role, what goes through your head now when you watch CNN and you see that, it goes without saying that far-right neo-Nazi movements are back.
And now in khaki pants, button-down shirts.
Yep.
Tucker Carlson's bow tie.
What goes through your head?
I think a lot of what we were talking about before. I think that in America especially, but even in Canada, I think we have a narrative in the 20th century push toward humanism, post-war humanistic kind of ideas of civil rights and we kind of think, despite ourselves, I think we do embrace in our own minds, in our societies, this idea that we've done something exceptional. We have moved the needle. We are moving this way. And when we have these what I call snapback moments, it's like a rubber band that's been pulled off the center line and then it snaps back. And you have this kind of shocking realization that within our culture, within the fabric of it, is this capacity to revert to a very base kind of nativism, hatred, tribalism, whatever you want to call it, that very quickly dehumanizes and reduces whatever it is that our anxieties are telling us, threatens us. And it's I think people are in a kind of shock right now that it's not only there's no apology for it anymore. There's no need for Doc Martens and tattoos and everything. It's like I'm gonna say this while wearing the button down of my company. You know what I mean? It's like unapologetic.
I'm not gonna hide my face
out in the open.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna hide my face because it's been validated. It's been validated in the mainstream by leadership, and I think to bring it back around to the film, I did feel that this idea that we're all so caught as Lionel's personal struggles are obviously intense. He says I've never been able to look beyond my own problems enough to care about anything else, but I think what he learns is the journey Lionel takes is getting to that point where he goes, my problems notwithstanding, the things going on in the world need to be contended with. I've got to get off my ass and pick a side and, move. And I think when I look at it, you sort of realize, Milos Forman used to say this to me, the great director, because he lived through the Nazis and the totalitarian Soviet state. Yeah. And, he sort of say, even if you're never going to win, if you don't push back, if you don't hold the line and summon up then this threat will encroach again and create enormous pain. And I think we're having one of those eye-opening moments of realization that you have to stay vigilant and you have to get tough.
Well, nice to meet you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Yeah.